My parents threw a big birthday party because my sister insisted in order to humiliate me, but I got ahead of her, and now everyone has seen the photos from her phone. I've never felt as invisible as I did during that time in my life. I was 18, and no matter how hard I tried, I couldn't escape the shadow of my sister Beatrice. She was 20, and to my parents, she was practically a superhero. Beatrice was the kind of person who made everything look effortless, you know? Always stunning, with that magnetic presence that made everyone love her. She had an intelligence I could only admire, and to top it off, she was president of the student council. Not to mention she was prom queen in her senior year, something no one, not even me, would ever forget. She was everywhere, with everyone, making everything seem brilliant. And me? I was just the little sister, always there to be compared to. Always in the background. Our relationship with our parents was always a bit off. Not that they treated me badly, but it always felt like Beatrice had everything I didn't. They were so proud of her extracurriculars. She stood out so much at school, with her presentations and projects, that I kind of just stayed in the background. Not that I wasn't trying, but my interests were different. I always liked studying, dedicating myself to books, and doing things at my own pace. I didn't have the patience or the desire to jump on the latest trends and chase the accomplishments. That seemed so important to my parents, and that was especially clear on birthdays. Mine always came right after Beatrice's. And trust me, when hers came around, it was a big production. Perfect decorations, guests from all over, even distant relatives we hadn't seen in years. As for mine, well, my birthday felt more like a check mark on the calendar. A small party with 1 or 2 people just to not let it slide by. I didn't complain much, but deep down, I knew that in that moment, I wasn't the priority. That's when things started to change. 1 week before my birthday that year, something happened that I never saw coming. Beatrice, in a completely unexpected way, started reaching out to me. She came to me out of the blue and asked how I was doing. I didn't even know how to respond. Beatrice wasn't the type to show much interest in my life. She was the busy girl, and I was more like an enigma in the back of the house. But to my surprise, the conversation just flowed. We talked for hours, sharing our frustrations, our fears. I was actually shocked by how much she was willing to open up. She talked about how anxious she was about college, how she felt pressured to be perfect, how the days were starting to feel heavy for her. I, on the other hand, shared my own fears, my insecurities about the future, the change to university, and honestly, even my anxiety. One thing led to another, and in the middle of the conversation, Beatrice said something I never expected. "I want you to have the party you've always dreamed of." I was speechless, really. It felt like she genuinely cared about me. At first, I thought she was joking, but she wasn't. Beatrice, as always, was persistent. She started planning the party for me, saying it would be the best one ever, a farewell celebration before I left for college. She told our parents, and to my surprise, they were all for it. They were excited. It was almost like they genuinely wanted to do something for me, something big, so I could feel special too. For a second, I felt like I was the center of the world. Like I was finally going to be the star of my own story. I'd always wanted a party like Beatrice's, with all the friends and family there. And it was actually happening. Or so I thought. When the day of the party came, I was excited. Sure, but also a bit suspicious. I couldn't help but wonder, is this for real? Was Beatrice secretly trying to erase me again? Even though she'd said all these kind words and made promises, something inside me couldn't shake the feeling of skepticism. But I decided to push that aside, at least for a moment, and just enjoy the moment. I was excited. I was finally going to be the center of attention. I was finally going to have my big day. But life, as always, has a way of surprising us, and my story was about to take a turn I never saw coming. The birthday party was in full swing. Everything seemed perfect. The decorations were on point, just like all of Beatrice's parties. Shiny balloons, twinkling lights, upbeat music. All my friends were there, people I saw most often at school, some from my old school, and even relatives I hadn't seen in ages. Everything was in its place, as if the universe had finally hit pause on the plotline of invisibility I'd always lived in. I was in such a state of happiness, I could hardly believe it. Beatrice really kept her promise, making me feel like the star of the night. She was by my side the whole time, introducing me to people, complimenting me, making sure everyone knew how special I was. It was like we were in a new phase of our relationship. Like the ego war that had existed between us had finally made room for a new chapter. I was so caught up in the moment that I didn't even notice when the mood started to shift. It was as if, suddenly, a shadow had spread over the party without me knowing why. I was chatting with a group of friends when Beatrice quietly stepped away, and I noticed she was heading to her room. I thought it was a bit odd, but I quickly went back to enjoying the laughter and jokes. However, a strange feeling started creeping over me, like I was losing control of something, and then everything came crashing down. The first thing I noticed was when I heard someone whispering my name. I looked to the side and saw my friend Carol, holding her phone, looking at me with a shocked expression, like she'd seen a ghost. "Did you see this?" she asked, her voice trembling. I knew something was wrong. I didn't understand what was happening, but my gut told me it wasn't. "Good, what are you talking about?" I asked, trying to hide the anxiety in my voice. She handed me her phone, her face still pale. And there, on the screen, I saw the video. It was a video of me, a recording of my private conversations, the things I'd said about my anxiety, my fears, my intention to see a therapist. Everything was there, exposed in a cruel way. And who filmed it? Beatrice. I froze. I couldn't breathe. How could she do this? How could she record my words, my weaknesses, without my consent, and then plan to show it to everyone? Rage built up inside me like a storm about to erupt. I felt betrayed in a way I can't even describe. I didn't know what to think anymore, but I knew I couldn't let this slide. I looked around and saw Beatrice still smiling, moving through the guests like nothing was wrong, telling jokes and being the center of attention. And me? I was just another face in the crowd, someone whose emotions and vulnerabilities she thought she could use as a spectacle. I needed answers. I needed to do something. Without thinking, I did the one thing no one expected. Suddenly, the anger overwhelmed me so intensely that I couldn't control the impulse. I got up from where I was, crossed the room, and headed for Beatrice's room. She was distracted, talking to someone. I took the chance and slipped inside. Her room. Her phone was there on the bed as if calling to me. I grabbed it, my hands shaking, and unlocked it, my heart pounding in my chest. I knew this wasn't right. I knew I was invading her privacy, but the pain and anger blinded me. It was like, at that moment, all I wanted was to turn the tables. I wanted her to feel what I felt. And that's when I found something I honestly never expected. A secret Instagram account, filled with compromising photos of Beatrice. I was stunned. She was at parties with friends, kissing boys, kissing girls, and all that perfect image she had built was a lie. The girl everyone thought was the model of the family was hiding behind a facade. I was trembling, but something inside me, a crushing wave of anger, told me what to do next. I grabbed Beatrice's phone, and in a burst of impulse, I started showing the photos to everyone. I couldn't control myself. My mind was in turmoil, and for a moment, revenge seemed like the only way to ease the pain. I needed people to know the truth. I needed them to see who Beatrice really was. The reaction was immediate. The laughter, the chatter, the party atmosphere all shifted into a tense, almost palpable silence. Some people laughed uncomfortably, others looked on in shock, but everyone was frozen, watching the revelation I had caused. Beatrice couldn't believe what was happening. Her face, which had been serene, transformed into a mask of shock and indignation. It felt like time stopped in that moment. But instead of satisfaction, what I felt was emptiness. I knew that my actions had broken something irreparable between us. My sister, who I once thought was my ally, was now staring at me with a look of distrust and anger. The bond we had built, that day evaporated in seconds. What had seemed like the start of reconciliation crumbled right before my eyes. And there, at the center of my party, with all eyes on me, I realized that no matter how much I had gotten back at her, something far more important had been destroyed. The trust between us, the memories of a sisterhood that, until then, seemed unbreakable. And in that moment, The truth hit me. Whatever had happened, whatever our relationship was, it would never be the same. The consequences of what I had done didn't take long to show. The party, which had the potential to be the best moment of my life, turned into my worst nightmare. As soon as Beatrice recovered from the shock and pulled herself together, she was surrounded by everyone, as if she were the victim in this story. She cried, tried to justify herself, and somehow, she managed to make everyone believe her. And me? Well, I was the villain, the one who ruined everything. I, who had finally thought I had a chance to be seen, to be noticed, was now being treated like someone out of control, out of touch. When my parents got home after the party, the explosion was immediate. My dad, always calm but with that stern look of someone who doesn't tolerate mistakes, gave me a lecture that seemed endless. My mom, usually more quiet but just as critical, stood in the corner, arms crossed, with an expression I'd never seen before. They were more worried about the image of our family, about what people would think, than about what had actually happened at that party. They didn't see me as someone hurt, betrayed by my sister, but as an impulsive teenager who destroyed everything. Everything I had done, all my emotions, were discarded right then and there, the moment they started treating me like a criminal. Do you have any idea what you've done? My dad asked, his voice hoarse with anger. You've ruined our family's reputation, Lucia. I can't believe you did this. Beatrice, as if nothing had happened, was there, her eyes still red from crying, but looking like someone who was already being comforted. I don't understand what went through your mind, she said, as if I were the crazy one, while receiving hugs and words of support from my parents. She treated me like I was a monster, while I felt like the outsider in my own house. That's when everything fell apart. In a fit of rage, I screamed more to myself than to them. I'm the one in the wrong here. And what about what she did to me? Doesn't that count? I was exposed, I was humiliated, and now I'm the one to blame for defending my privacy? But none of it mattered. Nothing I said made a difference. They were so focused on protecting Beatrice's image and avoiding a scandal that, deep down, they didn't even see my pain. They only cared about keeping up appearances. And that's how, that night, I was forced to leave the house. It wasn't a request, it was an order. They said I was out of control, that I needed to learn to deal with my actions. As if it were easy when you don't even have a place to stay. With a broken heart and a boiling head, I left. I didn't know where to go. I had no money, not even a decent bag to pack my things. The only person who offered me help was Vanessa, my friend from school. She was the only one who seemed not to judge me. The next day, after crying until my eyes were swollen, she called me, saying her parents had talked and they could take me in for a while. I didn't know what to do. I was lost, directionless, but I accepted Vanessa's help, because at least with her, I knew I could find some comfort. Vanessa's house wasn't luxurious, but it was warm. And there, I didn't have to pretend I was okay. I could just be myself. No masks. But deep down, the pain was still there. I missed having a place to call my own, the feeling of being at home, and above all, my parents' approval. As I tried to rebuild my life, Beatrice went on like nothing happened. She was too busy with her own interests, with her perfect life, unaffected by anything. She didn't even try to reach out to me, apologize, or understand what I was going through. To her, the problem was mine. It always had been. The truth was, despite everything, I felt like she'd never really cared. I was just a piece of her life puzzle, something she used when she needed to, and when she didn't, she simply ignored me. The anger kept growing inside me, but I was trying to move forward, trying not to let bitterness take over everything. Until 1 month later, when I was starting to adjust to my new routine at Vanessa's house, something happened. I had to go back to my parents' house to get some important documents. The university had finally accepted me, and to enroll, I needed some papers that were stored there. It was my chance to take the first step towards the future, to leave that emotional prison behind. However, when I arrived, I was met with a hostility that froze me to the bone. I knocked on the door, but my parents didn't open. I stood there, waiting, knocking harder, until I felt my patience beginning to wear thin. I needed those papers. They knew that. But it seemed that for them, I was a stranger, an intruder. They just ignored me. I screamed, asking for us to talk, to let me in. But the response was cold and clear. "You're not welcome here, Lucia." The door was closed for good. I was alone, like I always had been, but now without even the place I had grown up in. My heart raced. Anger flooded me again, not just because of what Beatrice had done, but because of how my parents had treated me, like I was an outsider in my own home. They had abandoned me, discarded me, and now, more than ever, I felt lost. That's when I realized the only thing I could do was move on, with or without them. I wasn't going to rely on anyone to live my life. They had chosen their side, and I had to accept that. But the weight of betrayal, loss, and exclusion seemed heavier than I ever could have imagined. I was broken, but at the same time, I was determined to rebuild everything. For myself. What I experienced that morning felt surreal. After everything that had happened, I knew this would be my last chance to grab the documents I needed for university. But my desire to fight for them wasn't just about the papers. It was about the last shred of dignity I had left. It was about freeing myself from a situation that emotionally imprisoned me. When my parents rejected me for the last time, it became clear that I had nothing left to lose. I was determined to use everything they had taught me against them, the emotional manipulation that had been used for so long to control me. The plan didn't come to me immediately. I was exhausted, emotionally broken, but the growing hatred for how I had been treated drove me to act. I knew that in order to finally sever ties with that cycle, I had to confront my parents once and for all. And what better way to do it than in front of everyone? In the place where my whole life seemed to be on display, where my image had always been a facade to maintain appearances. The church. The church was the center of everything for my family. It was where we gathered for big celebrations, where people saw us as the perfect family, always in harmony. It was where the social masks were firmly in place, and I knew it was the perfect place to tear them down once and for all. I wasn't just going to grab the papers. I was going to bring forward the truth of my life, the truth of what my family had imposed on me. That day, I wore my simplest clothes, no extravagance, but with a posture I had never shown before. The anger inside me burned like fire, but I also felt a strength I never knew I had. I was determined. I knew it would be a heavy confrontation, that there would probably be no going back. But I was no longer afraid. I was tired of hiding behind a facade of obedience and seeking approval. I wanted to be free. I arrived at the church just minutes before Mass started, and I immediately saw my parents talking to a few people. The facade was up, everyone looked happy, as always. When they saw me, there was a brief moment of surprise, but they quickly went back to acting like nothing had happened. Even Beatrice was there with her perfect smile, as if nothing had ever happened between us. I no longer felt like a stranger, but like an intruder who was about to tear apart the house of cards they had built. I walked toward them with firm steps, feeling the eyes of the people on me, as if they already knew something was about to happen. My father looked at me, frowning, as if he couldn't believe I had the courage to do this. "Lucia, what are you doing here?" he asked, his voice low but tense. That's when I made my decision. I took a deep breath and, without further ado, said loudly, so everyone present could hear, "I came to get the documents for my university. Enrollment. You're not going to stop me, and I'm not hiding anymore. No matter how much you try to belittle me, I'm going to move on with my life." A tense silence fell. Those words rang louder than any scream could have. My parents were stunned, but their pride was stronger than any shame I expected them to feel. Beatrice once again stood there impassive. I could see in her eyes that she was trying to manipulate the situation as she always did. She probably expected me to leave, embarrassed, but I didn't. "You can't talk to us like that," my mother said, trying to regain control of the situation. "This is not the place for this." "Well, it's the perfect place," I replied firmly. Because this is where you've always expected me to be who you wanted me to be. But not anymore. I'm going to be who I want to be. The tension was palpable, and everyone around us was watching, but my determination didn't waver. I knew what I was doing. This was my last chance to claim something that was mine, to free myself from the emotional oppression they had always imposed on me. Finally, my father, with a closed face and a heavy sigh, walked into the church office where they kept some papers. He came back with the documents I needed, and without saying another word, he handed them to me. I took the papers and held them tightly, as if they were the only thread of hope in a life that had seemed like a maze with no way out. I knew that what had just happened didn't mean a resolution. I wasn't going to leave there with a hug or an apology, but in that moment, something inside me settled. I was finally taking control of my life. It didn't matter that my family rejected me. I was free. Free to write my own story, far from Beatrice's shadow, far from my parents' manipulation. In the following days, the truth began to emerge slowly. The church, the family, the acquaintances, all knew what had happened that day. I no longer needed to hide my pain, nor the anger that had turned into strength. I didn't care what they thought of me anymore. I knew the path ahead would be difficult, but at the same time it was mine, and I was ready to face it all. The broken promises of my family, the disappointments, the betrayals, all of that was now part of the past. I was no longer the forgotten Lucia, the sidelined sister. I was the woman who decided not to bow down anymore. The university accepted me, and I went. I made new friends, met new people, lived new experiences. Each step I took brought me further away from the toxic cycle I had been living. But, above all, I learned to value myself. I didn't need anyone's approval to be happy. And despite the pain of losing the family I had always dreamed of, I finally understood. The greatest gift I could give myself was the freedom to be myself, without fear. Although my relationship with my parents and sister was irreparably damaged, I no longer felt lost. Because in the end, I didn't need a family that rejected me. I was building my own, one based on respect, truth, and above all, self-love.